Coming up on today's episode.
What we've been able to do is find the right balance between a financial vehicle that provides great returns, where the investor is really, really happy what they're producing, by effectively taking, bigger properties and designing them in such a way where we get multiple rents and where we get, multiple tenants or residents in the same building, if you like. But we sort of balance that out with affordable accommodation for the people living there, really high quality finishes, and really availability of everything that someone living in a small space will want to have. You have your laundry, your bills are paid, you have a kitchenette, you have your own bathroom that you don't need to share with anybody. You're living in something that feels and works very similarly what a small studio apartment will work like.
Dodgy advice and bad decisions can cost you big in real estate. We're here to make sure that doesn't happen. Welcome to the No BS Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jo Agresta, and it's time to take control of your property journey together. Welcome back to the No BS Real Estate Podcast, your listening how-to guide to the Australian finance and property market. I'm your host, Jo Agresta. And on today's show, I'm so excited to be diving into a topic that gets investors genuinely excited: positive cash flow property. Music to my ears. Now, if you're a first-time investor or someone that's genuinely curious about how the right property investment could replace your income or build long-term wealth, then today's guest is someone you'll want to listen to closely. Henry Vila, the founder of Stone Horizon, and he's not just talking the talk. His clients have generated over $7 million in returns through high cash flow properties right across Australia. So that's from busy professionals, self-funded retirees to everyday Aussies who just wanted out of the 9 to 5, and who doesn't. And Henry's built a process that guides people from land selection through to design, build, and passive income management. Like, what can I say? Well, Henry, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here.
I think what an incredible, when we met initially in the pre-interview, I was very taken back because of your process. It's so clear, it's so thorough, and it's not often that I talk to a lot of property professionals that say, I can get you positively geared properties and an income stream. And it sounds like a dream almost. So, Henry, like I said, there's plenty of people offering investment property advice. I want to go into the first question. What sparked your passion for this type of property investment? And how did Stone Horizon actually come to life?
It's interesting. I get that question asked a lot, is where did Stone Horizon came from? Yeah. Why it's still around? Particularly in a world where we push the concept of financial freedom and doing kind of property as a way of, in my case, quitting my job and doing that sort of things. And here I am 8 years later running a business. I'm probably busier than I've ever had. So people are always getting intrigued about why that happened. And to me, it was all about making sure that other people have access to the strategies and opportunities that I found myself using to quit my job all of those years ago and to get control of my financial future and obviously my financial freedom after a while.
And I think that's such an inspiring start, because it all has to start with you, right? Mm-hmm. When you're building a business and you're building, especially in the property space, it's awesome to know that the person who built that business has had the same experience of wanting to generate wealth. You've helped clients across Australia, from health professionals to FIFO workers. It's so random. What's the gap in the market that you are seeing?
Yeah, listen, it's a lot of what has happened in the history of Stone Horizon comes from the fact that there's actually not that many vehicles out there in Australia to invest in property that is positive geared, that is kind of, positive cash flow. And there's a whole bunch of people out there who kind of promise a bunch of results or who have all these strategies, but they all have only a piece of the puzzle. Most of them are really interested in selling you a $5,000 course or selling you a property here or a property there. We really thought there was an opportunity to provide a true end-to-end service that not only guaranteed or close to guarantee people a result at the end, but that was established in a way that actually didn't require people to stop doing what they are doing.
Yeah.
We're big on the concept of freedom, and as people will eventually kind of figure out by, in our book, I mentioned the fact that freedom means different things for different people.
Yeah.
I'm probably working harder than I ever had. I went into property to kind of quit my job because I found myself in a job I hated, with passion. But I'm probably still working harder than I did back then, but I never felt more free. So what we've done at Stone Horizon is we created a system and a process that allows us to give every Australian, every people in this country, the opportunity to experience the same, the opportunity to build wealth and get freedom, so they can do whatever they want. Now, for some people, that's go drink mojitos in the Bahamas for the rest of their life.
That sounds great.
For other people, it's just, going back and, maybe working a career that they're really passionate about, but maybe doesn't really pay that well, or just a mix of the two.
And I think you hit it like the nail on the head really right. Because when you're starting out in this space, especially property, like your first investment, you have no idea what to do. There's so much happening because it's buying your own home is not simple, but it's simple in the sense the decision-making process is, well, I like the look of it. It seems good. Yep. I'll do it. But then when you're starting on the wealth journey and generational wealth that you build, like it starts with you.
Yes.
That seems intimidating. So, you obviously nurture your clients through the very beginning. What is that experience like, for a first-time client? Like, are you getting a lot of people that walk through the door that don't have any property experience and go, your website looks great, tell me how to do it?
Yeah, it's actually awesome because we find a couple of types of people that work great with our process and with our system. Great clients for us tend to get great results. But we also find a lot of people that come to us that are exactly the way you're describing it. They're lost, they don't know where to start, or they have tried 3 or 4 things and those things haven't quite kind of worked out. People who bought all the courses, all the consulting, all the services, and they're probably not better off at that point than they were where that whole process started. But for us, it's about 2 really precise and distinctive groups of people. One group of people is the people who are really starting out, and they might have other investments. They might have built a portfolio of properties in their life. They might even have, a negative gear portfolio already.
Sure.
But they don't know how to go and do what we do. They don't know how to kind of focus on high cash flow rooming houses. They don't know what a rooming house is sometimes. They definitely don't know how to kind of manage the process of building a positive cash flow portfolio. And they are looking for that guiding hand that had the experience, that has the knowledge of not only, say, in my case, my own journey and the one of my leadership team, but also we've seen many, many journeys from many, many clients, and we have the great advantage of being able to bring all of those learnings into the next person and the next person, so we get more consistent results, and in an easier way. That's one group of people. The other group of people is people who are just busy. They have no time to figure any of this thing out. And if they do know how to do this stuff, some of them do. Some are really, really experienced investors who have long careers, very successful, but they just don't want to do it. They much rather discover that by, having a partner in their journey like us, then they can go back and do whatever they want to do. So
it makes sense.
Busy people who just don't have the time to do it. So people who are in those 2 groups tend to be the majority of our clients. They tend to be the ones that get the best results. But there's also people who are somewhere in between.
Of course. And I think that's natural. And, you touched on it just now, and I really want to break this down because the asset type that you do through Stone Horizon is interesting. So you specialize in properties, obviously, with positive cash flow. That's one thing. But then you're talking about these rooming houses.
Yes.
I want to explore this for the audience, who are hearing this term for the first time and going, how's a rooming house going to get me positive cash flow?
Yes.
Explain it to me in terms of like the asset type.
Yeah, and it's a very, very special type of property, and it's a type that itself has evolved
over
a
time.
lot over time, particularly in the last 5-8 years. Rooming houses have existed in this country for about 100 years. They got designed so people coming back from the war who maybe didn't have a family, didn't have a place to live, will have had somewhere to kind of crash and to survive. And over the last probably 10 years, we have evolved that concept from a place that is really stigmatized, that is really has all these bad connotations about people with bad behaviors and with, maybe dark pasts, into something that is really a modern version of accommodation. There is a modern version of living that, yes, does sacrifice space for quality, that sacrifice a little bit of space for for affordability, and that really can provide a really high quality level of accommodation or living to people who just don't want to live in the 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom,
That's right.
double lock-up garage stuff, which will be gigantic and, if you ask me, or horrendous to clean for a
one person.
single person out there. And what we've been able to do is find the right balance between a financial vehicle that provides great returns, where the investor is really, really happy what they're producing, by effectively taking, bigger properties and designing them in such a way where we get multiple rents and where we get, multiple tenants or residents in the same building, if you like. But we sort of balance that out with affordable accommodation for the people living there, really high quality finishes, and really availability of everything that someone living in a small space will want to have. You have your laundry, your bills are paid, you have a kitchenette, you have your own bathroom that you don't need to share with anybody. You're living in something that feels and works very similarly what a small studio apartment will work like. And in fact, many of the ideas that we've implemented in these properties, we've imported for places where living in that sort of spaces is pretty common, places like New York City and Tokyo.
True. And I like that you explained like the history of it, coming back from the war, this was something that had a bit of a stigma behind it. It wasn't necessarily a positive thing. But what I think you've unlocked an opportunity with is, okay, let's look at the people living in there, but now let's look at who owns that whole complex and how is that working for them? Because one of the biggest things I'm understanding about this process and why it's positively geared is because take a property, a normal 4-bedroom house, like you said, 4-bed, 2-bath, 2 garage. You rent that out to one person or one family. That's one income stream. And you've got to make sure that it's often these properties are negatively geared, right? Because you're not making enough. Now, in this case, you take that same 4-bed, 2-bath property, but instead those 4 bedrooms become self-contained. Are they furnished as well?
Yes, they are.
Right, so they're furnished, and then they've got community spaces in the backyards and maybe a communal kitchen, communal living areas that everyone can get access to. Each bedroom, in this case, is its own self-contained area. So it's got maybe a study nook, maybe a bathroom, shower, the basic amenities, and a bed, and a kitchenette. And now that rent that you were going to get for one property, same price, same caliber, you're now generating 4 rents at a time. Unreal, in my opinion. Love it.
I'm glad you like it.
Oh, no,
obviously we like it too.
Yeah, of course. And I think, do you have a lot of people that when they first hear about this concept, they're kind of unsure of it's almost unbelievable?
Absolutely. And listen, unfortunately we live in an industry where there's all sorts of crooks and people promising stuff that can't happen, and that almost becomes normalized. And in fact, one of the biggest challenge that we've had is we've chosen to take an approach to a lot of these things that is very subdued, very realistic. One of our values is we say we're normal people. So you see me, I'm a normal person talking like anybody else, using the same type of language, irrelevant to what my journey has been like. When people see what we promise or what our clients have been able to achieve, they think that we're like hiring actors and paying them off, and all this stuff is some sort of kind of big Ponzi scheme or something, until they understand the basics. And the basics are actually not super hard to understand, and I think the way you were describing it just before is actually a pretty good start. So we're building smaller spaces, but because we're building them together, we still get a lot of the economies of scale that you get when you build, say, bigger houses. In fact, most of our houses, if you're standing at the front, you don't know anything special about them. They look like a house, they fit in the normal suburb, they match the character and the presence of the street. You can't really tell what they are because all the magic happens inside. What we've done is we've divided the inside, and then it's kind of like buying, a little bottle of soft drink in a vending machine and paying more per unit of that than if you go to the supermarket and buy a big box full of exactly the same product. So what we've done effectively is we created, from an investor perspective, all the costs are aggregated into the property. But from a tenant perspective, the value is separated between them. So that means the rents are definitely lower than if you will rent like a big house. Maybe instead of paying, I don't know, $500 or $600 a week, maybe you're paying $250 or $300. So it's attractive for the resident to go and save some money on rent, and they're sacrificing stuff that they probably wouldn't use anyway. Now, by adding multiple of those tenants together, you end up, instead of $500 or $600 per week, like we were saying before, you might end up with $2,700 or $3,000 per week.
And like, what is the, I guess, so that would that mean that you're positively geared or returning like maybe 11, 12% in a year?
Absolutely. So it, obviously, different metrics for different things. But if you think about return on cash, or the actual money invested by most investors, you're probably around 13, 14%. That's what today's interest rates. Obviously, at the time we're filming these, interest rates are historically high in comparison. There's lots of conversation about those interest rates going down, which will mean the returns will get better. But even in the current environment, the returns are significantly better than most other vehicles out there.
And I think that's why it's so smart. It's different because in Australian history, we don't typically, like, this is a very UK concept. The rooming houses, and in Australia, like you said, it's existed, but no one's really tapped into it. So I like that you've kind of tapped in, found a process, and then found a way to walk people through who want to begin. And it takes me to, I guess, like, the most important part we always say is location, right? What are the key ingredients you look for in a location or a property type to deliver that kind of cash flow? And does it play a part?
It's a great question. It absolutely plays a part. We invest a lot of time, effort, and resources into make sure that we cover both of those factors. Those two factors play a big role. And I'm going to talk about the second one first, and then I'll come back to location in a second. The way these properties are designed is very, very intentional. And it comes from long time of studying people who live in these small spaces. Unfortunately, Australians don't do that a lot. It's actually pretty rare to find your typical kind of, friend saying you that, he lives in a studio apartment, or I'm actually not even sure we're building any of those anymore. And definitely when we're building them, we're in a place where, they perform very, very differently. But there's other places in the world where that's the norm. Where I personally grew up in an apartment. And I grew up in an apartment that was a big apartment, and it was like a 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms.
That's decent.
Like that, right? And at the time, it's like, oh, you live in a big place, right? We even call them houses, even though they're not technically houses. And then I moved to Australia, and I realized that everyone wants a big backyard, and, the quarter of an acre block and all this other stuff, which cost a whole lot of money and capture a whole bunch of resources, but are completely unproductive. So what we've done is we've developed, we call them design principles. And it's all these elements that we incorporate in the designs of these properties to make sure that the properties are functional, that they're durable, and that the people who are ultimately going to live there are going to have a great experience in a way that is really, really independent. That each of these, technically they're rooms, we call them studios, behaves more like an apartment, even though technically they're not.
Makes
Now,
sense.
that gives us the property. And then the second question is, where do you put that property? Because one of the things that is incredibly important in this type of strategy is to make sure that we're putting the property in the right place.
Yeah.
It's a concept that we've developed. We call it tenant mathematics. And it's 3 key factors that determine whether an area is suitable or not for a property like this. And that concept, it's very different to the way it will work for a normal house.
Yeah.
Right? A place that will be great to, say, build a house or do a project of townhouses or any of those things might not be the right place at all to build a rooming house. It's actually even more complicated. One street might be perfect and the next street might be completely unsuitable.
Really?
And that's part of the reason why we've have to develop our own way of evaluating
what's good and what's
good and what's not, to make sure that we don't go and end up buying the right product in the wrong location because we haven't found a way of moving a house to the next street yet.
Yeah, that's the next problem that you'll probably solve. But it's true. Like, I think, when I think of rooming houses, often I think of areas or like locations that students could have access to, or like, overseas students coming here trying to start somewhere because they offer a lower, rent instead of living in the heart of CBD. And part of that, what I'm thinking out loud here is, if I'm a student, I'm coming out here, I would much prefer to live in a rooming house where I get to know people, in that space. Do you also manage that rent roll of those clients, or do you work with someone who does that?
No, absolutely. Listen, one of the things that we knew from our own journey into investing in this type of property was that they needed to be managed differently.
Yeah.
My real story is I come from a business background long time ago, but as a property, the DNA of our company is a construction company. We build properties. So we started building this stuff as a way of me investing in properties like this. And then ultimately what ended up happening is my real plan was to, we'll partner with local agents. We'll tell them a little bit about these properties. We'll help them a little bit based on the knowledge that we've acquired from investing in similar projects overseas, and then we'll get them to manage. And what followed was a rude awakening. We realized that the typical Australian real estate agent is just not set up at all to be able to manage these properties. The typical real estate agent works this way, and hopefully I don't offend anyone who's kind of watching this. But it's just the way the market works. They have a property that is vacant that they want to put a tenant on. They put an ad on 2 or 3 platforms, the usual suspects most of the time. And then they collect a whole bunch of applications. Then they go and do maybe a couple of reference checks. They evaluate those applications. They make a recommendation to the owner. We think this is a tenant. The tenant says yes, or the owner says yes, and the tenant says yes. They put a contract in place. And then they go, Joe, here's the keys. Here's my business card. Please never call me again.
True.
Right? They're really not set up to provide service. They're set up to find tenants, put contracts in place, and then just collect money. That's basically what they're really good at. And to be honest, in traditional residential properties, that's probably all that's required. In this type of properties, though, it works really, really different. Residents or tenants in this type of property have a different level of expectation.
Yeah, of
and
course.
we also have discovered that keeping the tenants happy is a big factor in the success of these projects. The happier tenant stays longer, takes better care of the property, and over time they pay higher rent.
Yep.
So we discovered we needed to create that service. We needed to create that function to be able to deliver those results. And because I already had a bunch of these properties myself, I had no option but to either find someone or go and create them on my own. And that's exactly what we did. I ended up, hiring an ex-property manager that helped me manage my portfolio. And then, as it often happens, inevitably, our own clients started asking, so Henry, can you recommend a manager? Saying, no, not really. They're like, okay, but who manages your portfolio? Well, my portfolio is a little bit different. Come on, Henry, who manages your portfolio? I said, well, I have my own guy.
Yeah.
They said, oh, would your guy manage my property? I said, well, we're not really set up commercially to do that. This is just my employee managing my portfolio. And then we got that question asked enough times that we realized there was a massive gap there, and that if we were really going to be successful and deliver the results to investors, we couldn't just build the properties. We really need to focus on the end-to-end. And then that drove a 3-year transformation of our business that turned it into what it is today, where we are still a building company, but a building company now is just a portion. It's a single business unit, if you like.
Yeah, it's like an arm of your business.
And the rest kind of works in an integrated way to be able to make sure that ultimately people get the result, which is why we exist.
And I think that's great because the all-in-one service is really what a lot of people chase. Because one part you go to a builder and then they say, okay, see you later. I don't have anything to do with you. So good on you for figuring out that that's what the market needed and then putting a system in place to service it, because a lot of people don't do that. They go, well, we don't do it, so good luck.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Joe. One thing that we discovered, which wasn't really in the script when we started thinking about, providing these services, is having those services all available under the one roof. Not only make sure that the investor could get the result at the point where we, sit down and start thinking or start talking about putting one of these projects together or building on one of these properties, we kind of know what the full process is going to be, which means we can control it. But also it created some magic that we actually weren't prepared to, which is when you put all these people in the same company, in the same room, in an open plan environment, you start getting collaborations on stuff that collaboration doesn't normally exist. You get the guy who's ultimately going to work with the tenant and who's going to provide that service. You get them talking to the builder or the supervisor who's going to be there doing the technical, hammering and putting the stuff together. And both of them are sitting on the same table with the designer who's ultimately designing where the kitchen's going to be and where the bathroom is going to be. And what you get is direct feedback from the actual people living in the house and from the actual owners of the house in terms of financial returns and financial performance. You get all of that filtered through the whole process, to the point where we made decisions that sound a bit counterintuitive, like let's spend money in providing better flooring, because even though it's going to cost us more in construction, we know that further down the line it's either going to make clients happy, tenants happy, which means that maybe we can collect a little bit more rent, or maybe it's going to reduce vacancy, or it's going to reduce maintenance over time. That link between all the functions is not just about providing all the services. It's about providing these services in an integrated way where every single function contributes what they can contribute to the whole. It's a typical, 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3. That's exactly what we discovered. And I'll admit, it was a bit of I don't want to call it a fluke, but it was a real surprise. It was something that we weren't prepared for.
Well, I think, the way you've kind of said it, it's a great thing that you have direct feedback, because you don't often get that when you build something. Like in a typical building construction company, you either get the feedback later when they first moved in and it's usually positive, but you don't hear about it 10 years later, like, oh, how did the house hold up? Because you're managing these people through the rental process and the landlords through owning those rooming houses, you now have this direct line of improvement. Like, that's a great all-in-one flow of what would you call it? Like a life cycle of these properties.
It also keeps us honest, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think it's I don't want to say it's a negative thing, but it's obviously something that we take with huge responsibility, but it's also something that ultimately we have accepted as something that needs to be part of the system. And it's this. There's a lot of our competitors out there, or competitors in certain areas, or, properties brokers or whatever. They're only interested in selling you a property.
Yep.
But they are not vested in the outcome. They're like, here's a property. Believe me, it's going to do great. Believe me, you're going to be able to rent it for $1 zillion. But when the property is built and once they hand you over the keys, they're out to the next next thing. Like they're not committed. They don't suffer any of the consequences. They actually sometimes don't even know if the property actually provided the results or not.
Or if it went anywhere.
One of the things that we have to deal with, and we're actually super happy because it keeps us honest and it keeps us focused and it keeps us, engaged, is when we're making a decision at the beginning of the process around, hey, Joe, you should probably buy this block of land, or we're going to build this property. This is the design that we have come up with. We know that if we make a mistake at that point, if we sometimes, look the other way and, drop the ball, we're going to live with the consequences till the very end.
That's
because
true.
Again, that property is going to be ours, and we're going to have to find the tenants, and we're going to have to rent it. And if we didn't do a good job up front, all of that shows up. Now, that is a big responsibility. But at the same time, it allows us to make sure that we are focusing what really matters, which is client value first, which is like for every property that we build is built by an investor who ultimately wants to get returns. And those returns don't happen until the very end.
Yeah.
But the whole system, the whole company is focused on that very end. And that means that we can deploy resources we wouldn't deploy otherwise, that we can make decisions that we wouldn't make otherwise, that sometimes we can say no when other people couldn't do that. We can go and talk to a client, and sometimes a little bit confronting, where we need to go and say to an investor that they're wrong, or that I know you love that place, and I know you love that house, and I know you want to build this thing, in the same suburb you live in, but that doesn't work. And if it's not going to get them the results, there's no way we're ever going to agree to that, because ultimately we're going to have a problem much later.
Well, I think that, it's quite different for a business to say, you've got to take the advice, and it's so important because this is a different type of investment that anyone's probably used to. So you're not going, and what I like about, Stone Horizon and what you've built is there's support at every step of the way. When I was doing my research, it's so clear that you're there every single step. And you kind of touched on your competitors and how you're different, but what is it that you think is so like your secret sauce without giving away the secret?
Listen, we're very transparent. I don't think it's a secret. I mean, I'm pretty sure we do plenty of things that are kind of special that other people don't do, and I won't bore people with the details of our internal workings. But there's a couple of things, and you're right. I am involved through the whole process. Yeah. Now, I can't do all of that myself. I have a relatively big team that it's a team of guns who really know what they're doing, and I feel more like the conductor in an orchestra. Like the conductor in an orchestra doesn't play any music. I feel like I'm not actually playing any music. I'm glad that I have a really, really big team who are really, really good at what they do. And I'm just there to provide coordination and to provide background and to make sure that things get resolved and get aligned. But I've done this a lot of times. And I went through this journey myself personally. And I paid the price of not knowing what you're doing. And, I remember my first rooming house, there's a whole bunch of compliance stuff that happens during construction, which is kind of part of our strengths, is that we are the builder. We're not going to go and hire a random builder and hope that they are going to build a high quality property. When, we made a mistake in one of the bathrooms, and in rooming houses, mistakes cost a lot of money. We had to redo a whole bathroom. We lost $15,000, or I lost $15,000. Now, I can tell you right now, that mistake will never be made again. Right? So I paid $15,000, but my clients don't need to go through that. Now, we work in three key pillars, and we covered a little bit of that, just a minute ago. But just to provide a little bit of clarity, this is really what provides strength to kind of our process. And it's, we start with strategy and transformation, with strategy and feasibility. That process, it's a process that I drive personally, and it's one of the things that I'm both proud of, but I also enjoy massively. When people talk to the sales team of Stone Horizon, they probably can't buy anything if they don't talk to me. At some point, we'll have a conversation. I have a team that helps me, because otherwise my calendar will be even more crazy than it is. But anyone who buys, a project with us, anyone who works with us will have met me personally. There's a reason why I tend to be the face. There's a reason why it's me here and not some, business development manager. Or we really believe, and we really, enjoy kind of working in this space. And then, I'm an engineer by training. I'm a business person. I started a building company a zillion years ago. And I still really enjoy being on site, even though I'm not there as often as I would like.
Yeah.
So I'm involved in that process. And I also am someone who does not come from a construction background. So I've had to learn some really complex construction concepts and make them simple, dumb enough that I can understand it. So that allows me to then explain them to people who are not interested in construction at all.
But I think that's so awesome, because I think often, when we live and breathe a profession, like early days, you often can get people lost in the jargon and lost in the process because you understand it, you're the expert. But when you've experienced it and you can retain that very beginning of how you learnt, and then you transpose that to your clients, that's a beautiful thing, because the only thing that, a lot of people want really is to be understood. So if they're going to make this big investment, they want to feel comfortable, that they know what they're buying, how they're buying it. And to have a team like yours, and the fact that they get to meet you as well, like that's a special thing. It's really awesome that you do that.
The other factor that has made us a little bit special compared to most of the competitors out there really is that a lot of my team have actually invested in this stuff. And it's not in that order. It's actually the opposite order. Let's say that a lot of the Stone Horizon team comes from the pool of clients that had already worked with us. My operations manager was a client before he became our operations manager. Gosh. A lot of my construction team had invested in this type of stuff before they came and became part of Stone Horizon. And the same thing applies to all the levels. Everyone who is involved in the process, everyone who kind of works directly with clients particularly, they not only are experts in what they do, but they also know what to be an investor. They also know what it is to have these properties. We're all clients, and we get exactly the same services and pay exactly the same rates as every one of our clients, because that allows us to make sure that the service we're providing to our clients makes us happy, makes them happy, and it provides a really, really consistent experience for everybody. And that's something that I don't think most people out there in this market can say.
Honestly, no, I don't think so. Like, that's extremely unique that you've all been there. And it helps massively when you're dealing with, someone who's new to the space, like a new customer comes in. They're going to be dealing with people that actually get it because they've either been there before or they've worked in it for a long time. And, talking about your customers and your clients, can you share maybe a client success story, like maybe someone who really turned their life around after adopting this strategy?
Wow, that's probably the hardest question you're going to ask me today. And it's going to sound a little bit cheesy, but there's so many kind of to choose from. And the challenging part is that they're all different.
Yeah, of course.
But they're all very, very valuable because everyone has a story. Everyone has a story of where they come from and where they're going to. And we've been lucky enough to be part of that story when that change actually occurs and when things kind of change for them. But there's a couple of really, really memorable ones. Maybe I'll mention one of them. So we had our clients, one of our early clients, she now has had a property for quite a number of years, who had a property in Sydney. I think it was an apartment. I actually never got to actually meet the property. It was completely paid off. She's divorced, grown-up kids. Typical case. It's actually incredibly similar to a lot of the stories we hear from our residents and our tenants, right? Women in their 50s who are divorced, grown-up kids, and suddenly they don't want a big house and the big backyard. She had very similar story, but she was on the investor side. She was on the owner side. She had, like I said, a completely paid off property. That's all she had. But she literally had no cash flow, no income. She didn't really want to, necessarily go back to work. And but she also didn't feel happy, if you like, living in this particular property. So what she proceeded to do, and this is entirely her I guess her idea and her merit, we can take no credit for this, is she decided to sell that property and then reinvest that money into a high cash flow kind of rooming house that was, in her case, completely paid off. So no loan, no nothing, which means that 100% of the rent went directly to her. And then the money that she had left, she went and bought a caravan. And now she lives kind of somewhere. We never know where she's going to be. She gave us a call, and she's been in the Northern Territory and around Australia 3 or 4 times, and she got her own version of freedom. Now, is that being rich and wealthy and all those sort of things? Well, for some people it won't be, but for her, that's what it is. It's like she has a guaranteed salary, every year, whether she works or doesn't, whether she feels like doing something or not. And she can decide to be here today and be 2 states away, in a couple of weeks. And, none of the typical restrictions and ties that some of us have, right? So that for us is an icon of true freedom. And it's a really inspiring story of what we allow our clients to do and what we enable. Like I said, we didn't do that. That's all her idea. That's all her doing.
Yep.
But we're so glad that we could be a small part in that journey.
That's so inspiring. I love hearing stories like that. And this is why I like to ask that question. I know it's a tough one, so I appreciate you digging deep and thinking about that. But what's beautiful is that someone who probably lived in that apartment for so long, who then made a decision to do something very different. And in your 50s, like there's a lot of risk because, you could go for something else at that point, or you could just stay and be comfortable. You've paid off your house, like you have no reason to do it. But then to get that true freedom, like you said, whatever that version of freedom looks like for you as a person, whatever it is, if it's travel, if it's, whatever, she achieved it and you got to be part of that journey and, help her out. Like, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, listen, and it's also a show that, different people, do kind of different things. We have people who are really driven, who want to build big portfolios, 2, 5, 7 of these properties and make lots of money. That was never her plan. Yeah. Like, Henry, we're going to do one of these. We're going to pay it off, and then that's going to be it. I'm never going to buy another of these things from you. That's all I need. I'm happy with that.
Give it a go.
I'm just going to go and buy my thing and just live the life that I always wanted to live. And we couldn't be happier that was actually the case.
That's awesome. And one thing I do want to ask, like, I know we're coming to the end of our time and it sucks because I would want to talk to you for 10 years. So I'm trying to be strategic with what I ask you for our listeners. But one of the things that I do want to know, are there any myths about positively geared properties that you want to bust right here, right now? Like an assumption that someone goes, oh, yeah, but I don't believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, there's everyone talks about positive cash flow. It's this like panacea that everyone is kind of chasing, and every salesperson out there who's trying to sell properties to anybody is kind of unfortunately making shit up. That to be able to kind of try to sell their goods to random people. Everything from NDIS to there's a thing called co-living now, which is really just a kind of concept. It's an American term that really is meant to be a product pretty similar to what we built. But someone here thought it was a good way of just trying to sell houses to people and try to get them to operate kind of outside of the line of the law. The real myth here, and it's not so much a myth as it is a misunderstanding. It's unfortunately something that people don't really talk too much about because, there's so many vested interests and there's so many people who kind of don't want to point at the ugly stuff or don't want to point at the limitations of any strategy. We all want to kind of talk the good stuff, but only some of us are happy to provide kind of a balanced view.
Sure.
In our case, is because you're going to live it at the end and I'm going to be around. So I'd much rather it now than ever. way too often we hear on discovery calls and in conversations and sometimes even in interviews like this, someone who wants a property that is great cash flow and has good capital growth and is cheap to build and that just doesn't exist. The perfect investment doesn't exist. There's always a choice. Now, in my own portfolio and in the option of most of our clients, they have chosen cash flow as a tool. They have chosen cash flow as that thing to chase that will ultimately create the actual wealth, particularly long term.
Yeah.
We don't chase capital growth. I'm super, super happy to sacrifice capital growth because capital growth is something that you cannot bank on, that is not guaranteed. It's a hope. It's a hope that we've been high on for the last 30 or 40 years in this country.
That's so true.
And whether that will continue to happen or not, well, listen, I don't have a crystal ball, so maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I'm sure I'm going to be collecting, positive cash flow checks from my properties in the next month and the next year, and probably 10 years from now. So that's really the biggest myth out there, is that you can actually get both. You can't get both. You need to pick one. Now, capital growth still happens.
Yeah.
My properties are worth a lot more now than they were in the past. But that's not why I invest in them.
Yeah, and I like that concept. I think that was well explained. That was a good myth to bust, honestly. Like the capital gains has always been something that everyone chases, but it's like, how long have you got?
Yeah, listen, and it's unfortunately it's a typical. And listen, I'm a foreigner. I came to this country 21 years ago, and when I first saw the way we invest in properties in this country, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And then I eventually became Australianized, and I went and did the same thing everyone else did, right? I bought negative gearing and realized after a while that I was paying to have my tenants live in my house.
Yeah.
Right? So that didn't really sound too well after a while, particularly once you hit events like, GFC or COVID or other things where what's the capital growth now, right? There isn't any. And that's why we thought this stuff needs to work from day one. And it will get better over time because rents continue to go up and, the house is a house. You don't necessarily need to pay more for it along the way. And you get capital growth and you get a whole bunch of money that you can go and reinvest and compound and create long-term wealth over time the same way you will somewhere else, but that you don't need to do magic to access. The biggest thing here around negative gearing is people forget that you might have a property that's worth 10 times, 100 times what it was worth when you originally bought it. But that doesn't mean you get the money. And it doesn't mean you can spend the money. It doesn't mean you can enjoy the money. You have, lots of stories like this client of mine that I was talking about before, who are sitting on $1 or $2 or $5 million of property, but she didn't have, money to go and enjoy a holiday, let alone to live the life she wanted.
I love that. This has been very inspirational, actually, Henry. I've got to say, I want to close it out with one last question. For someone who's listening today, like one of our buyers, and thinking, I'd love to do this, but I don't know where to start. What do you say to them?
Listen, there's a couple of ways of starting. There's a couple of ways of connecting kind of with us. We put a lot of content in social media. We try to come as often as we can to places like this where we can make the information available to kind of new people and things like that. Obviously, there's only so much that we can cover before I, start hoarding the space in kind of your program.
I wouldn't be upset about that.
I also have to say I could probably talk about this stuff forever, but I'm pretty sure the audience will get really bored really quickly of the guy, the guy with the funny accent. So there's a couple of ways of connecting with us. So one way is, if they go to our website at stonehorizon.com.au, or if they search, Stone Horizon in all the social media platforms and YouTube and everywhere else, they'll find heaps and heaps of content. We're very, very transparent. We make it a case to actually put this information out there because the more people understand this type of property, the more these properties are going to be built. And we have a big, big mission to make sure these properties have built. Now, for a small group of those, then, we work with about 20 investors every year, building this type of property and this type of portfolio. And if they go to our website, they'll be, somewhere in there to click a button and go and talk to someone, maybe to me, maybe to some part of the team. Now, for the rest of your audience who's interested in this stuff, or maybe they're just a little bit curious, and they literally don't know where to start. They just want to do, some learning and some stuff without going and paying $5,000 for a course that is probably not going to teach them anything really. I wrote a book in this space. It's called The Rooming House Millionaire. It became an Amazon #1 bestseller within a couple of hours of release, which was incredibly humbling. That anyone will want to read what I have to say about this space. It's a book that is not really related to a business. It's kind of a Henry project, and it's designed to help everyone out there understand these properties and these strategies better. And if it's something that they want to do, and maybe they don't want to get the help of a company like Stone Horizon, maybe they're independent, they want to go, or maybe they're in a jurisdiction or in a place where we don't build these properties. All the information about what we do, it's there. All the information about how to do it is there. How to select a site, what are the regulations involved, what happens with tenants. We have a whole section around risk management and what to do when the proverbial hits the fan, and all the stuff that can go wrong, because we believe that knowledge should be known by anybody before they invest in any property, let alone in a property like ours, which is kind of a little bit different. So if they go to, stonehorizon.com.au/nobs, there'll be a little form there to give us their details, and we'll send them a free copy of the book.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for giving that to our audience. Henry, I can't thank you enough for being here and for being so generous with, sharing your knowledge, not only on the podcast, but with your book as well for our listeners today. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully this has been useful. It's been really lots of fun to do here, and I can't wait to see where some of your audience is about to take their journey.
Oh, me too. And look, for our listeners, I hope this gave you a real world look into how positive cash flow investing actually works, not just in theory, but in practice. So if this sounds like something you're curious to explore, or you just want to connect with Henry directly, then head on over to stonehorizon.com.au, and we will catch you here next time on the No BS Real Estate Podcast. Thanks again, Henry.
Awesome. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. That's a wrap for this episode of the No BS Real Estate Podcast, powered by Abodey AI. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. If you're looking for more guidance on your home buying journey, you can visit www.abodey.com.au for expert advice, property insights, and the tools you need to find the right home with confidence. If you're already on your journey, you can also download our app. Just search Abodey AI on the App Store or Google Play. Have any questions or want to connect, you can follow us on Instagram at abodey.com.au or send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.